Hello, I'm President Bob Caslen, and it's my privilege to welcome you to the University of South Carolina for Discover UofSC 2021. We're proud to come together for this exciting event. Thank you to our campus and community partners for their support, and to all whose hard work made this event possible. We've been through a lot since last March, not just here at our university and state, but across our nation and the world. Since last year, we have seen our community come together with the spirit of resilience to address this global health crisis. We responded with innovative solutions created by our own public health experts and researchers, such as the saliva test and the wastewater monitoring. We implemented a comprehensive testing plan, resulting in over 70,000 completed COVID-19 tests in the fall semester and almost 80,000 completed tests so far this spring. We went to class, conducted research, opened new classrooms and laboratories, and formed new partnerships. Together, we delivered on our academic and research mission while keeping campus open and ensuring the safety, health, and well-being of our community. In our new strategic plan, we are committed to achieving new levels of research excellence while seeking to transform the lives of the people of South Carolina and beyond. Events like Discover UofSC prove that despite great adversity, we can rise to meet the challenges before us, to create solutions to our greatest problems, and serve our communities through innovative research and collaboration. Our speaker today, Dr. Helmut Albrecht, represents this mission and purpose. Since the beginning of COVID-19, he has been a key leader in our efforts to navigate the pandemic while serving our communities. As he worked to heal our friends and family and neighbors, Dr. Albrecht was on the cutting edge of learning how to best combat this pandemic in a hands-on clinical setting. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Albrecht. Again, welcome to Discover UofSC, and thank you all for attending and participating. Go Gamecocks. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Prakash Nagarkatti, Vice President for Research.
Thank you, President Caslen. Welcome to Discover UofSC 2021, our first ever virtual showcase of research, scholarship, leadership, and creativity at the University of South Carolina. We are so happy to be back this year and to welcome all of our presenters, reviewers, campus organization leaders, and other participants joining us from far and near. We take pride in the fact that we are a flagship comprehensive research university ranked by the Carnegie Foundation as an R1 university, which is the highest ranking in research. Our faculty generate about $280 million worth of research with an economic impact of close to $1 billion to the state of South Carolina. All of this enables UofSC to provide significant research training opportunities for our students at every level, including our undergraduate students. We are the largest PhD awarding institution in the state of South Carolina with over 400 doctoral degrees awarded every year. We employ more than 100 postdoctoral scholars, helping to train the new generation of academic researchers and teachers. Our medical students and residents pursue clinical research, giving them the real-world experience they need to become the best doctors for their patients. Today, Discover UofSC will feature close to 1,000 posters and 3-minute thesis presentations, which will be judged individually by reviewers who have generously volunteered their time and expertise. And leading up to today's event, it has taken a great deal of hard work and dedication to deliver such a large event virtually. In recognition of that effort, I want to thank all of the stakeholders who made this possible, including my staff, the Office of Undergraduate Research, the Graduate School, the Center for Integrative and Experiential Learning, Prisma Health, and UofSC School of Medicine, among many others. Thank you all for your wonderful contributions. Well, we hope to conquer COVID-19 by next April so that we can get together in person once again as we look ahead to a bright future in which we have conquered COVID-19. It's only appropriate that our team selected today the keynote speaker, Dr. Helmut Albrecht, who has been on the forefront of COVID-19 battle since the very beginning. He serves as the Heyward Gibbes Distinguished Professor of Internal Medicine at University of South Carolina School of Medicine. Dr. Albrecht was one of the first leading physicians treating COVID-19 patients in our state. He has worked tirelessly over the past year to research and promote innovative treatments needed to heal COVID-19 patients. Thank you, Dr. Albrecht, for joining us today and for your willingness to share your experience with treating COVID-19.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by thanking mostly Vice President Nagarkatti, but also President Caslen and Dean Hall for me to give this year's keynote address. When I was first asked to do this, I said, sure, what an honor. Then I thought about it for a little and looked back. Let me start here. So we've now had 3 keynote speakers for Discover UofSC. The last one was Dr. Kenneth Ramos, an MD and PhD, an associate of the National Academy of Sciences and member of the National Academy of Medicine from Texas A&M. Before that, here in the middle, Dr. Carolyn Potter, a Rhodes Scholar and NSF Graduate Research Fellow, who's now an Oxford Research Officer conducting research with patients of England's National Health Service. And of course, the first keynote speaker, here to the right, Suji Nakamura, the 2014 Nobel laureate in physics. I thought about it, how I fit into this, and found the answer pretty quickly. I don't. All of the 3 previous speakers were accomplished scientists and full-time researchers. Not that I'm not a researcher. I'm actually a pretty accomplished scholar. I've published over 300 original papers, written over 50 book chapters, have been given awards and financial support from various organizations for my research for now over 30 years. I was awarded the Heyward Gibbes Distinguished Professorship from UofSC. So I can hold my own as a scientist, but people who know me understand that I'm also a physician and a teacher, and I spend as much or more time doing those 2 facets of my profession. And this may give my talk some relevance for you. It's actually somewhat unlikely that you're in line for a Nobel Prize in physics, but several of you may be headed for a career path such as mine, research being very important, but only part of what defines your career. You listening to this and you being part of Discover UofSC is a sign that you may be well on your way. The premise of research is actually not difficult. Research is a question that the researcher believes needs to be answered. Then there are research methods to help you answer the question, and then you have an obligation to disseminate the answer you found, even if it's not what you thought you would find. In order to be a scientist, you have to have enough imagination to be able to figure out a research question. Research can be fun, but it's usually hard work. If you're a visionary and not a process person, or a process person and not a visionary, find someone who can complement you. Sometimes you got to get lucky, or at least be in the right place at the right time. I was there in the early HIV days and stuck myself with a needle from the first AIDS patient I ever saw. Did not feel so lucky back then, but I learned everything there was to know about HIV and fashioned that into a long-lasting career in HIV research. Here we are in a new pandemic, and down here it says opportunistic. And that has a negative connotation because it often describes an unethical person. But it really comes from the same root that opportunity comes from. There's a clear need here in COVID. There's funding available. There's a real opportunity. Can your interest, your research question relate to this opportunity? And let's talk about COVID and research questions a little. I can't cover all of COVID in the time I have, but I will give you a little background on the biology of the virus, some examples of testing, what we've done here, some management issues, and finish with the biggest hope, which are the vaccines, and the biggest threat, which are the variants. So SARS-CoV-2 is the 7th human coronavirus that is known to infect humans. 4 are found worldwide, here on the left, and they cause an average about 25% of the common cold episodes every year. But they are not a real threat. Then there's obviously SARS and MERS, which were much more serious with a very high mortality, but they were limited in global distribution and eventually disappeared. SARS-CoV-2, the newest kid on the block, is widespread and potentially deadly. By the way, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus, COVID-19 is the disease, and makes you look good to understand the difference. It's like HIV being the virus and AIDS the disease. There is no COVID-19 virus. There is a virus that's cause of COVID-19, and that virus is called SARS-CoV-2. This will not be the last coronavirus we will see. There are thousands of others, including many in birds and reptiles. These are just some of the more concerning ones in this picture because they're all in mammals. If you can infect a ferret or a chimpanzee with the coronavirus, you can probably get it into a human. Our receptors on the cells are so similar. So up here is MERS. That's humans and camels. Here in the middle are the cold coronavirus, but you see a lot of other mammals in the mix. And down here, here's the old SARS. And very much down here is the new SARS-CoV-2. If I blow this up the lower right, here again you see the old SARS and some civet cats, which were the intermediate host for this. Down here is now SARS-CoV-2. We don't know exactly what the intermediate host is. We know that pangolins, which are Chinese anteaters, which we don't see very much here outside of zoos, can carry this. But we also know that ferrets and minks are extraordinarily susceptible to this. Actually, COVID-19 has wiped out most mink farms in Europe and in the US. So mink furs will get a lot more expensive in the near future, which is actually okay with me. The problem, however, is here. All of these here are bat viruses, right? And the bats are the real problem. They can carry and usually survive a huge amount of different viruses. They're involved with so many viral diseases that we've talked about recently: rabies, Ebola, MERS, and now COVID-19. The problem is that they're mammals, i.e. they're very similar to us in a way, and they can fly, which is a really bad combination if you have viruses in them. Switching over quickly to the clinical piece of it, all of you have heard that most patients admitted to the hospital have fever, shortness of breath, and cough. Actually, more than 75% of patients have all three. There are actually many other symptoms, and some are listed here in such patients, but only loss of smell and taste seems to be more specific and make it look different than other flu-like illnesses. If a virus cannot contain the virus in the respiratory tract, then trouble is brewing. Patients who have other organs involved, such as the heart, have a worse prognosis. If your immune system cannot contain the virus and starts overreacting in a so-called cytokine storm, condition characterized by hyperinflammation, multi-organ system failure threatens. Then there's bizarre neurological conditions and blood clotting events, which are all bad prognostic signs. Finally, if in the lung, the inflammatory condition turns into a scarring condition, patients need to stay on the ventilator for weeks and months. and it's hard to survive that. What many scholars initially did not realize that while fever and shortness of breath were common in hospitalized patients, they were extraordinarily uncommon in the outpatient setting. Most patients actually do not get admitted, and many of such patients have no symptoms or symptoms that you may not think of when you think of COVID-19. As these are infectious just the same, this is and what was driving this epidemic, these asymptomatic or atypically symptomatic people. When we realized it almost a year ago that these asymptomatic infections were driving the epidemic, it became clear that CDC's and DHEC strategy only testing symptomatic patients had to be doomed to fail. I met Professor Philip Buchholz from the School of Pharmacy. He does a lot of PCRs, and we both knew instinctively that difficult nasopharyngeal swabs where you have to go way back, which require a trained nurse, expensive protective equipment, and expensive and difficult to find cartridges to run this on specialized machines was not going to cut it. And then who wants a deep nasal swab more than once in their lifetime anyway? You can trick them the first time, but after that, people realize this is not pleasant. So we experimented a little bit. We experimented with self-swabbing, not so deep swabbing, Q-tips, and dry swabs without culture media. All of these were actually at least as good as the gold standard and cheaper and faster. So here you see it doesn't matter who swabs, and if you do it yourself, it is fine. It doesn't matter if you go all the way back. The breakthrough, however, was saliva. And here it says raw saliva, where we actually don't prep the saliva at all. And everyone can spit. And we made this work as well as nasal swabs in our hands. And we tested this in communities such as Pickens County and companies that asked us to help them screen, and in our hospital here actually at Richland, we did this. Employee health, like DHEC, was only testing symptomatic staff. There was no way of knowing how many infections we were actually missing. So we designed a research project to find out. We targeted high-risk areas, like the NICU and the areas where the patients with COVID were. We encouraged weekly testing, but we actually let everybody who was worried test. And Misha Stutman and his lab in the School of Pharmacy ran this for us. So you see that we never got above 3% positive rates, which indicates good control. But our staff and providers just know how to protect themselves, so we didn't expect a very high rate. Community rates were slightly higher, but in over 5,000 tests, we stayed around 2% positivity rate. So we didn't find a whole lot of patients, but was it worth it? It was cheap, but was not free. We still haven't written it up, and we did not attract funding for this. But how do you set a price tag for being able to find some cases early or having the peace of mind going home because you tested negative? We're quite sure we prevented secondary transmission as we found cases in high-risk areas such as the NICU or among team members who encounter a lot of people in the hospital, such as IT, environmental services, and nutrition. Probably the biggest benefit was finding a couple people who shed billions of viruses without knowing it. And they could have become super spreaders if we had not pulled them out. It also helped us to develop and improve the testing methods that became the backbone of the safe testing campaign that USC is still running. Switching to management. So this are just some of the options we have. Antivirals such as remdesivir that people have heard of, anti-inflammatories including steroids, cortisone-like things, plasma, antibodies. And I get asked this every day. I get at least 2 or 3 phone calls. I have this and that, and how should I treat this? And I would like to put a plug in that we may need to rethink that question. And I think we need to stage them first and treat then depending on what we find. So this is the most important slide of the talk. If you understand what's going on here, you can be successful in managing COVID. In the early phases, the virus predominates. You have constitutional symptoms, including fever, may have a little dry cough, some gastrointestinal problems. In this stage, you actually don't want to suppress your immune system by giving the patient, for instance, steroids or even hydroxychloroquine, which is actually not an antiviral, but an immunosuppressant drug given to people with rheumatological diseases. That has no role in here when you need your immune system the most. The second phase, however, the infection has spread to the lung. Shortness of breath, your oxygen saturation is lower, and your immune system is losing this and now overreacting to catch up, but it's probably doing more harm than good. Here in the latter stages, in the latest phase, immune dysfunction and organ damage dominate, and this needs a totally different approach here than you need here. So how do you stage someone with COVID? Well, we actually measure the amount of virus in a PCR, and you've heard of PCR by now. Most labs just don't tell you what it is. They just tell you if it's positive or negative. Positive with 1 billion viruses or 100 viruses makes a huge difference, trust me. It's actually not all that difficult. PCR is polymerase chain reaction. It is literally a chain reaction. You're running cycles, and each cycle multiplies the amount of RNA. If you only need few cycles to detect RNA, you had a lot of virus to start with. In this example of spiked samples, here if you had 300,000 copies of virus, you saw a signal after only 14 cycles. But with only 10 viruses, it took over 30 cycles. Guidelines say we do not know if this is important. I can tell you, and I do this a lot, I cannot live without this information anymore or manage patients without this. We can also get x-rays, run some inflammation markers. CRP and ferritin are easy and back in minutes. IL-6 is even better, but takes a couple days. If your inflammation is starting to affect blood clotting, D-dimers go up, and that may actually be important information for me. If I can get a blood group early to be ready, if I do need plasma, can order it very quickly. And I can check if the patient is oxygenating okay. So this is all a little theoretical, but let me talk about a patient. So this would be a major HIPAA violation, but President Caslen has actually allowed me to talk about this, his encounter with COVID-19. Someone like our president cannot completely isolate. While he is an ardent supporter of masking, there are board meetings, donors, parents, students, and all of them want to shake his hand, take a photo, or toast with him, which involves touching 2 glasses, both of which had just touched their mouths. So that's high, high risk. And not surprisingly, he was infected in November. I got called, and Professor Buchholz told me he was hot, which doesn't mean he's hot, which means that's his term for he has a lot of virus. I saw President Caslen, and he had very mild symptoms. I called Phil, are you sure he has over 1 million viruses per cc? Yes was the answer. I checked it again today, and now he has a couple million more. So Bob Caslen is a workout enthusiast. He has less body fat than I have in my left leg. He is male, which has a slightly worse prognosis, and he's old enough that one would want to watch him close. He has no significant comorbidities, but he's been deployed where he was exposed to substances that may affect your immune system. We checked the chest x-ray and it was not totally normal, but he was oxygened very well. His inflammation markers were not only good, they were excellent. No sign whatsoever that his immune system was struggling. Little cough, some congestion, some fatigue, overall very mild illness. Well, now the question, should I put him in the hospital, give him remdesivir, plasma, and steroids, because I can? Should I give him an antibody cocktails? He's, after all, our president. They've done this with other presidents. And while I knew I couldn't keep a workaholic like President Caslen down completely, I knew he would let me know if things got worse. And we, patient and physician, decided on wait and see. Next day, virus was down a little bit, and we were both happy, but then up again, and we're now on day 5. He feels the same, a little impatient, not thrilled with the numbers. What now? You know, if you let your president go down on your watch, you become unpopular on campus fairly quickly. But since repeat inflammation markers shows perfect numbers again, and his x-ray is not worth, if anything, a little better, we actually stayed the course, and next day he's turning around. He feels better and his viral load drops. So this is a logarithmic scale. Here, he has a 100-fold drop to less than 1% of what he had the day before. Here's another 100-fold drop, and here another one, right? Now it's only answering when can I work out again, when can I go back to work. So these guidelines that say they are not certain if measuring virus or inflammation markers are of value, it certainly helped me manage not only Caslen, but many others through their COVID disease. And again, flying blindly as a physician, I think, is very overrated. I have very little time to talk about actual meds, but a couple thoughts on treatment. We were first to use convalescent plasma in South Carolina, the first to have patient donate plasma, organized the first plasma drive, and actually the Health and Wellness Center over the summer became a donation center which supplied a lot of South Carolina. We've given over 1,000 plasma courses, hundreds of antibody cocktails, and countless courses of steroids and remdesivir. We were actually one of the first that started these studies with remdesivir, and we had many patients in these studies before remdesivir was available outside of studies. We're also one of 3 US sites that is running a study on a new drug that works like remdesivir, but appears many times stronger and has a huge advantage. It is actually a pill, whereas remdesivir is an infusion, so we can treat outpatients with this, we hope. Decreasing inflammation is actually more tricky. This is just how B-cell signaling works. There's a lot of other cells that want to signal you. And if you're not into reading that, I can show you that visual. So that's really complicated, right? This is just the signaling. There's a lot of other things you can do in the immune system. So for me, even before COVID, the task at hand, when I hear where if you have moderate to severe psoriasis, take this drug, all of these drugs were tried for COVID, and it always feels a little bit like trying to repair a Swiss watch when the only tools you had are big old hammers. So we probably need smarter approaches to this, and this may be one of such approaches. At least the authors are really smart and are probably in this room right now. An underappreciated and underrated aspect of care of ill patients is the non-drug therapy. You need good infectious disease docs, and having great critical care physicians to take care of critically ill patients is critically important, seriously. Knowing when to intubate, how to ventilate a patient, how to manage organ dysfunction makes a huge difference. Having done this for over a year now, if you do not have support from mental health care providers and do not have palliative care support, you will not be able to provide optimal COVID care. And they've worked hard at Prisma. And we've gotten much, much better at this. This is the mortality last March, and you see this has improved dramatically. If you then have great critical care and infectious disease physicians, as we've had at Prisma and UofSC, you can actually do even better. Vaccines, the game changer. So, slight detour. This slide is in many of my talks. This is the mortality in the US in the last 100 years or so. So this is the black curve here. This blue curve is what all of my colleagues, surgeons, oncologists, cardiologists have done for you. Very little. This is what infectious disease physicians have done for you. Not that chemotherapy or surgery do not work, but if you're supposed to die of a cancer, you still die of a cancer, maybe a little later. But nobody dies of smallpox, polio, or diphtheria anymore. The spike here, Spanish flu. And the spike we will see now with COVID are a reminder that infections can still be an incredibly deadly force, especially if not managed correctly. Over the last 160 years, life expectancy in the US has doubled. Yes, doubled. There's two factors that explain greater than 90% of that. One is clean water, the other one is vaccines. And these diseases that you have listed here, most of them are now in our back view mirror. But they not only cause death, but in many cases lifelong disability and suffering. And now we have a vaccine for COVID. How did we get here so fast? People instinctively thought this must be shortcuts, but these vaccines are actually better studied than most other vaccines. Usually the timeline is so delayed because nobody wants to risk advancing a not so great or not so effective vaccines, given how much it costs to study this. In this case, Operation Warp Speed gave billions of dollars to underwrite the risk. And with no risk of their own, countries could massively accelerate their testing. Also, we've gotten much better at this. Science is just better. And scientists actually had a lot of the early work done on related viruses such as SARS and MERS when they disappeared. Here you see that while the same studies were done, they were not done one after the other, but they were done simultaneously and more stacked. They even stacked manufacturing parallel to the vaccines being studied. When money is not an issue, you can do studies with 40,000 patients instead of 4,000. And not only get the results faster, but also actually have much better insight into effects and side effects. So Operation Warp Speed was very expensive, but it actually did what it's supposed to do, accelerate vaccine research. They just forgot to add a distribution piece into this. And by themselves, vaccines do not save life, vaccinations do, and that piece should have been part of this, but I think we're catching up. So mRNA vaccines are all the rage, and they should be. Extraordinarily safe and extraordinarily effective at the same time. All cells use mRNA. That's actually how they signal that they need to create proteins which cells need to do all the time. Here are ribosomes and reticular endothelial systems. They're the machines that print these proteins. But which proteins they should make is encoded by these mRNAs. They're essentially almost like a blueprint. This vaccine simply adds some new blueprints to the pile, and the cell starts making a protein that SARS-CoV-2 needs, the so-called spike protein on all the vaccines we have so far. And it's only one protein, so it cannot reassemble into a full virus. And mRNA is dismantled into regular molecules that are abundant in our body in all cells without a trace. And no, mRNAs do not mingle with our DNA. However, if you get COVID, the virus will, and will do massively in different ways. So if you're afraid that something mingles with your DNA, be afraid of the virus, not the vaccine. The vaccine also doesn't make you sterile or make your hair fall out, as I have a lot of hair these days. What it does do is it works beautifully. This is BioNTech Pfizer, but Moderna looks similar. And you see here the striking 95% protection against symptomatic infection. If you look closer, and here the first couple days are taken out, the protection actually starts around day 10. Mathematically, at the time you get your second shot, the protection is around 50%. But you really see down here that after day 10, very little actually changes. We actually think that the second dose gives you immunity longer, not necessarily better. If you look at the internet, you see all this weird stuff about the vaccines. So if you look at the internet, you see all this weird stuff about the vaccines and all these side effects, mostly about the second shot. And in real life, where we've given more than 100,000 vaccines now, the vast majority has no problems with either shot, actually. Who should be vaccinated? Well, everybody. But who first? And that depends on what your goal is. So the US, CDC, and South Carolina have emphasized protection from deaths and chosen their targets for that. It's actually pretty clear that you do not gain life years at all by vaccinating people in nursing homes and the very elderly. I personally would have put a lot more emphasis on trying to end the pandemic. And for that, you need to vaccinate people who are spreading the virus. And this is not the healthcare workers, the elderly, or people residing in nursing homes. So this was the task, and the powers to be started here and down here. May not be popular, but I would have started here. Healthcare workers could have protected themselves for another 3 months. We know how to do this. And the over 70-year-olds could have stayed in and out of harm's way for another couple months. Teachers and essential workers had to go in, should go in, and they should have been protected. We need schools open, and the risk is not for the kids, but the teachers and the grandparents, especially if they live in a multi-generational household. So I think these should have been moved up. I believe also we need to support the social fabric of our lives. I think it is as important to get Broadway open as it is to vaccinate political leaders, which, by the way, I'm totally fine with. In the end, we all need to be vaccinated. We just differ a little bit in our opinion on how to get there. So the cure for misinformation, which is abundant, is information. Should I vaccinate my parents? Not necessarily, only if you like them. I often use the following analogy. Vaccines provide training for and arm your immune system. It is safer for you to go into the war with this virus with an armor and trained than untrained in nothing but shorts and t-shirt, not knowing where it comes from. Vaccine hesitancy is curable with information. Anti-vaxxers are not. So don't waste your time there. If you believe that a vaccine causes shaken baby syndromes, that Mothers Against Mercury should receive government COVID funding, despite the fact that there's no mercury or fetal DNA in these vaccines, you probably will not listen to rational arguments either. People need to understand that some vaccinated persons have temporary side effects. It's actually not a bad sign. This is your immune system kicking in. But that's not a sign that the vaccine is not safe. Risking COVID is not safe. Over 500,000 dead in the US from COVID and 0 from the vaccine. And people are still hesitating. One of the things we can do is we need to lead by example. We need to help dispel the myths, or at least not propagate them. I'm not particularly happy with the initial lack of plan on how to roll this out. We cannot live week to week and get a different amount of vaccine every time the shipment arrives. The rollout was actually initially badly botched. Dropping vaccines off at health departments and adding this as an unfunded mandate to an already massively overtaxed system was naive at best. We are getting better, but we still need to accelerate this a whole lot more if we want to be done by the summer. And I will share with you why I think we need to be done by the end of the summer. Since everybody needs to be vaccinated anyway, we should be less concerned about wasting vaccines. We should be a lot more worried about wasting opportunities to vaccinate. I work in an infectious disease clinic. Every one of our patients needs the vaccine, and everyone right now goes home without a vaccine, despite them all needing it. Well, that's because our clinic is not allowed to vaccinate. And that just needs to be changed. Down here is my fix. Don't die by the tier. Go after tier 1 actively. Here's your vaccine, Mrs. Albrecht. But let the others come in and get in line. But it will only get more difficult. These are some of the hurdles, right? People who cannot read or write well enough to sign up, people who do not speak English, people who don't have a driver's license or internet access. All of these need a vaccine in order for this to work. So this will determine if we can be successful, and there's very little planning into this right now. The fix is clear, however, right? We need to go after these inequities. We have to meet them where they are, and by people who understand them and preferably look like them. Polio had very long lines, but it was a success, an incredible success. We may fail this one because we did not create enough lines for people to get into. So let's get this done. There are enough people that need to be vaccinated. Happy myself that I got the vaccine. Happy to pay it forward. This is me at Gamecock Park vaccinating others. This young lady in her fashionable boots and jeans is 99 years old. She got both of her vaccines and hopefully will celebrate her 100th birthday in September without being afraid of every step she takes outside of her door. Variants. If we don't get this done, these will take over. And this is the threat of us getting out of this. Here's an overview of our current thinking. Initially, the virus was an A clade virus. When it swapped into the US, it became, all of our virus belonged to the B clade, actually the B1 family. And then there's different mutations and different variants. The highest priority that we have so far are variants of concern. B117, down here, the so-called UK variant, P1, first found in Brazil, and then up here, B1351, the so-called South African strain. They have signature mutations, some are listed here, 448 and 501, that are in the spike protein. The spike protein is the one that the virus uses to bind to the cell. So 501 increases binding and therefore increases infectivity. 484 causes some of these antibody cocktails that I've mentioned before not to bind that well. So here are variants of concerns with their characteristic mutations. California, actually on the day that we taped this, was elevated to a variant of concern. New York, which is still in the lower tier, which is variants of interest. By the time you probably hear this talk, this will also be a variant of concern, and you see here various mutations that characterize them. The last lowest group is variants of investigation. They look different, but we don't know whether they also act differently. So they may become variants of interest, and they may then become variants of concern. Right now we have 4. By the time you hear that, probably 5, including the New York variant. And one of the reasons is because of the next couple slides I'll show you. You see here the first article about the New York variant. They all cluster here together. Half of them have this 484 mutation. Here, another big chunk has the 477 mutation. They can't have them both, but this allows you to have another mutation, which is probably not good, which is 957. And you see where they fall into the virus. So why am I spending all this time on this? Here's a case of a healthy 60-something-year-old who went to New York, fully vaccinated. Upon his return, he and his unvaccinated daughter developed mild symptoms and were found to have COVID. Okay? Both of their viruses are very close to the New York variants, but they don't have the typical 484, 477, or even Q957R. However, of the 17 mutation, it shares 15 or so with this New York variant, including one that I'll talk a little bit about here, 253. So everybody's been focusing on the receptor binding domain up here. This is this little blue area. You see 484 is here, 501 is right next to it, 477 is on the other side. This is where the virus binds to the cell. And this is where most antibody cocktails that are commercially available bind. However, this entire thing is the spike protein. And this, for instance, D53, the so-called antigenic supersite, is an area where a lot of these antibodies that are generated by the vaccine and natural immunity actually bind. And this patient has a mutation here. So we think that the vaccine prevented him from getting ill, but could not prevent that the vaccine immunity was not enough to keep that down. But he did very well with this. So you can't miss these. These cannot spread in our state like the natural viruses have. And so we found this and worked this up very quickly at USC, but we need to do more of this. So you see here of CDC data, we are sequencing, that's the technique to find out a variant, 0.08% of the viruses that we find here. England, for instance, does 8% of all their isolates. Right? We just can't afford to miss these and have them spread like this. The good news comes from Israel with about as many people as South Carolina. They're already done, vaccinated almost everybody. While they have mostly the UK variant, the vaccine still worked great. So you see still over 94% effective. So if we can get there quick enough, I see no reasons why this approach can't work here. But we need to be a little quicker in rolling out this vaccine, which means for the US, we got to vaccinate more than 2 million people a day, preferably double that. Last thought, if you become a scientist, you can make a difference beyond grants, publication, and money. Use what you've learned to make a difference in your community, whatever your community is. There is a global community, trust me. Here are two of my examples. Before I came here to tape this talk, I spent the day as Doctor of the Day at the State House, volunteering medical care to legislators and the staff there. Do that twice a year. Sometimes I get to tell them that they should stop doing this nonsense. While they usually ignore it, at least I get to voice my opinion. And sometimes that makes a difference. We talked about testing, and because we can, we use this to help out other organizations, including the South Carolina Philharmonic. And we have a really world-class symphony here in Columbia. We just help to get their musicians tested so they can play. Art and music can make a huge difference in times like this. So they not only dedicated the concert to us, but we're so happy with it that it will let all healthcare workers listen to their concerts for free. And they mention School of Medicine and School of Pharmacy of USC down there. Don't listen to their concert for free, but still pay them because they struggle to survive. But the town and gown collaboration is gratifying. So make a difference, be the difference. Last slide, thank you all the people that helped me through the last year. School of Pharmacy lab folks listed up here that really made all of this possible. The leadership of UofSC and Prisma Health that supported even my more visionary concepts. Our ID division here, a lot of people who spent many 16-hour days in the past year. And the Vaccine Center folks are trying to make a difference. Rob and Deb and their teams. Brandon, this is not you, sorry, this is your wife, but thanks to all of you, even if you're not mentioned here by name. And thanks again for having me, and next year I'll see all of you in person. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's presentations, and we look forward to seeing you next year.